I had searched for nearly 2 years to find the perfect piece of property. Not too large to maintain alone, but spacious enough to finally live my small hobby farm dream. When I discovered the 3-acre lot in Meadow Creek Estates, it seemed ideal. The real estate listing emphasized countryside living with modern conveniences and featured photos of properties with large gardens, chicken coops, and even one with alpacas grazing in the background. My heart soared when I first drove down the winding road lined with modest homes sitting on generous plots of land. Each property was unique, some with vegetable gardens, others with small workshops, and several with decorative split-rail fencing that gave the community a charming rural atmosphere. The location was perfect, close enough to town for convenience but far enough away to see stars at night and wake to birdsong instead of traffic. The house itself was nothing spectacular, a simple 3-bedroom ranch with an outdated kitchen and bathrooms that would need renovation. But it was the detached garage that could easily be converted to a small barn and the spacious, partially fenced backyard that sold me. I could already envision my long-held dream of having pet goats becoming reality. After closing on the property, I spent 2 months renovating the garage into a proper shelter and installing proper fencing. I researched local ordinances thoroughly, confirming that the county permitted small livestock on properties of 2 acres or more. Not once did the real estate agent mention an active HOA with restrictions against farm animals. The welcome packet I received simply stated that Meadow Creek Estates maintained reasonable standards to protect property values. Finally came the day I brought home Daisy and Blossom, 2 Nigerian dwarf goats from a local breeder. They were smaller than most dog breeds, with soft caramel-colored fur and gentle dispositions. From the first day, their personalities shone through. Daisy was bold and curious, always the first to investigate new things, while Blossom was more cautious but deeply affectionate once she trusted you. The goats quickly established a routine. Each morning they greeted me with soft bleats, eager for breakfast. Throughout the day, they kept the grass trimmed better than any lawnmower and provided endless entertainment with their playful antics. In the evenings, they would follow me around the property like faithful dogs as I completed chores. Their presence transformed the property from a house into a home. 3 peaceful weeks passed before I noticed a white envelope in my mailbox bearing the Meadow Creek Estates HOA logo. Inside was a tersely worded notice informing me that unauthorized livestock had been reported on my property, constituting a violation of HOA Covenant Section 7.4. I was instructed to remedy the situation within 14 days or face further action. As I stood reading the letter in disbelief, a shadow fell across the paper. Looking up, I found myself face to face with a woman I had never met. She wore tailored slacks and a button-up blouse despite the summer heat, her blonde hair cut in a precise bob. "I see you got our notice," she said with a smile that did not extend to her eyes. "I am Karen Winters, HOA Board President. Those goats simply cannot stay. Perhaps you should have read the full covenant before bringing farm animals into our community." Before I could respond, she turned and walked briskly to a spotless white SUV parked across the street. As she drove away, I noticed Daisy and Blossom watching from their enclosure, blissfully unaware that their future had suddenly become uncertain. The weekend after receiving the notice, a sharp knock on my front door interrupted my morning coffee. Looking through the peephole, I saw Karen Winters standing on my porch, flanked by 2 men in polo shirts. Her posture was rigid, one arm clutching a leather portfolio to her chest like armor. I opened the door, forcing politeness into my voice. "Good morning, how can I help you?" Karen Winters stood approximately 5'4" but carried herself as if she were 6 feet tall. Her blonde hair did not move when she turned her head, suggesting liberal use of hairspray. She wore a navy blue blazer with a small golden pin shaped like a house on the lapel. Her smile was practiced, her eyes calculating. "Good morning, I believe we met briefly last week. I am Karen Winters, president of the Meadow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." She gestured to the men beside her. "This is Robert Davidson, our treasurer, and Michael Patel, our secretary. We are here to discuss your ongoing violation of the HOA covenants." I invited them in, more out of shock than hospitality. Karen immediately took charge, selecting the most comfortable chair in my living room while her companions remained standing. She placed her portfolio on my coffee table with ceremonial precision. I brought the complete covenant documentation so there can be no misunderstanding, Karen said, opening the binder to a page marked with a red tab. Section 7.4 clearly states, no livestock, poultry, or other farm animals may be kept on any lot. The language is unambiguous. I leaned forward to examine the document, but this seems strange for a rural community. Several properties have chicken coops, and there are alpacas just 3 streets over. Karen's expression tightened. Those alpacas belong to the Hendersons, who were grandfathered in because they owned the property before the HOA formation. As for chickens, we have been addressing those violations systematically. Your goats are simply the most recent and most visible infraction. Robert, a balding man with a permanent frown, spoke up. The covenant exists to maintain property values and community standards. Farm animals create odors, noise, and unsanitary conditions. My goats are cleaner than most dogs, I protested. They are small, quiet, and their enclosure is cleaned daily. They do not affect anyone else's property. Karen's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the binder. Nevertheless, they are classified as livestock and explicitly prohibited. The board has voted unanimously to enforce this covenant. I tried reasoning with them. The county permits small livestock on properties over 2 acres. My lot is 3 acres, well within county regulations. Michael Patel, who had remained silent until now, adjusted his glasses. HOA covenants supersede county regulations when more restrictive. You agreed to abide by these covenants when you purchased your property. But my real estate agent never mentioned livestock restrictions, I said, frustration rising in my voice. And the welcome packet only contained general information. It is the responsibility of property owners to familiarize themselves with all covenants, Karen replied, her tone suggesting I was being deliberately obtuse. Ignorance of the rules does not exempt you from following them. She removed an official-looking document from her portfolio and placed it on the table. This is a formal notice of violation. You have 30 days from today to rehome the goats and remove all associated structures from your property. After that period, the HOA will assess daily fines of $250 until compliance is achieved. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs, and if I refused to get rid of them. Karen's smile returned, cold and efficient. Then the fines will accumulate as liens against your property. Eventually, the HOA has the legal right to initiate foreclosure proceedings to recover these costs. I sincerely hope it does not come to that. She tapped the notice with one perfectly manicured nail. 30 days, not 1 day more. After they left, I collapsed into a chair, the notice trembling in my hands. Through the window, I could see Daisy and Blossom playing in their enclosure, cheerfully oblivious to the threat looming over them. They had become more than pets. They were companions who greeted me each morning, who made this house feel like home. The thought of losing them sent a wave of panic through my body. My hands began to shake, my breathing becoming shallow. I recognized the familiar symptoms of anxiety taking hold, but beneath the fear, something hardened inside me, determination. I would not surrender without a fight. I would find a way to protect my goats and my home. The next day, I decided to speak with my neighbors, hoping to find allies or at least better understand the community dynamics. My first stop was the house directly across the street, where an elderly couple named the Johnsons lived. Mrs. Johnson welcomed me with a warm smile and homemade lemonade. "Those goats of yours are adorable," she said as we sat on her front porch. "My grandchildren love watching them when they visit." When I explained my situation, her expression darkened. Karen has been on a power trip since becoming HOA president 3 years ago. Last summer, she forced us to remove the bird feeders from our front yard, claimed they created unsightly debris and attracted pests. Mr. Johnson joined us, nodding grimly. Before Karen, the HOA mainly handled road maintenance and community events. Now they police everything from grass height to the color of garden hoses. Encouraged by their support, I continued down the street. Some neighbors welcomed me openly, sharing their own frustrations with the increasingly restrictive HOA. The Ramirez family had been denied permission to install solar panels despite county incentives for renewable energy. The Coopers had received citations for their children's basketball hoop, classified as unauthorized recreational equipment. Not everyone was sympathetic, however. The Millers listened politely but reminded me that rules are rules. The Thompsons refused to even open their door when they saw me approaching. Most disturbing was my conversation with the Wilsons, who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. "We prefer not to get involved," Mrs. Wilson said nervously, constantly glancing toward Karen's house further up the street. "Last year, we spoke against one of her initiatives at a meeting. The next day, we received notices for 5 different violations we never knew existed. It is easier to just comply." By late afternoon, I had spoken with 12 households. The community was clearly divided: a handful of Karen loyalists who believed in rigid rule enforcement, a larger group who resented the HOA's overreach but feared retaliation, and a few who actively opposed Karen's leadership but felt powerless to challenge it. Armed with this knowledge, I attended the monthly HOA meeting held at the community center. The room was arranged with military precision: a long table at the front where Karen presided with the board members, rows of chairs facing them like subjects before royalty. Approximately 20 residents attended, far fewer than the 100-plus households in the community. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I stepped up to the microphone. Keeping my voice steady, I presented my case, explaining that my goats were pets, not livestock in the traditional sense, that they were clean and quiet, that they brought joy not just to me but to neighborhood children who often stopped to visit them. Karen's response was immediate and dismissive. "This is not about whether the goats are pleasant pets. It is about maintaining consistent standards across our community. If we make an exception for goats, next someone will want pigs, then cows, then who knows what else. Property values would plummet." Several board members nodded in agreement. Robert, the treasurer, added, "Studies show that neighborhoods with farm animals see a 15% decrease in property values over 5 years." I challenged this. "Do you have those studies available? Because research I have found suggests that rural properties with small-scale hobby farms actually increase in value due to growing interest in sustainable living." Karen's smile tightened. "We can debate research methodologies all evening, but the covenant is clear. No livestock means no livestock, regardless of size, cleanliness, or emotional attachment." As the discussion continued, I noticed that one board member, an older gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes, remained silent. While others nodded enthusiastically at Karen's every word, he appeared uncomfortable, frequently glancing down at the documents rather than meeting my gaze. His name tag identified him as Frank Wilson. When the time came to vote on my request for a variance, the result was predictable: 7 votes against, 0 in favor. Even Frank ultimately raised his hand in opposition, though he did so with obvious reluctance. Walking home under streetlights, dejection weighed heavily on my shoulders. Near the community center dumpster, I noticed a folder that had apparently been discarded. Curiosity made me retrieve it. Inside were pages of HOA complaints and enforcement actions spanning the past 3 years, Karen's reign as president. A disturbing pattern emerged as I reviewed the documents at my kitchen table. Certain homeowners received immediate attention for minor infractions, while complaints against Karen's friends were marked, resolved, with no action taken. Properties belonging to those who had opposed her at meetings received multiple citations in suspiciously close succession. The Wilsons' story of retaliation was not unique. It was standard operating procedure. What had begun as a simple fight to keep my beloved goats was revealing itself to be something much larger: a battle against a system of selective enforcement and petty tyranny. The question was whether I had the strength to stand against it alone. The final notice arrived exactly 28 days after Karen's visit, delivered by certified mail requiring my signature. The envelope felt unusually heavy in my hands, weighted down by official language and legal threats. Inside, the message was brutally clear: failure to remove all livestock from the property by 5, p.m. on Friday will result in immediate commencement of daily fines, $250, and potential legal action by the Meadow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. A separate page detailed the escalation process, how fines would accumulate as liens against my property, how the HOA could eventually force a sale to recover costs, how my credit score would be impacted. The methodical cruelty of it all felt designed to crush any thought of resistance. I sat on the back steps of my porch, watching Daisy and Blossom through tears that would not stop flowing. They trotted over to the fence, bleating softly, sensing my distress. Daisy pushed her soft nose against my hand through the fence slats while Blossom pawed gently at the ground, their simple gestures of connection making the pain even more acute. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. The familiar tightness compressed my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision as the panic attack took hold. I slid from the steps to the ground, drawing my knees to my chest, trying to remember the grounding techniques my therapist had taught me. The goats' persistent bleating eventually penetrated the fog of anxiety. They continued calling to me, refusing to be ignored, demanding my presence in the moment. Slowly, I focused on their sounds, on the texture of the wooden step beneath me, on the smell of fresh grass. The panic receded incrementally, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. As twilight settled over the property, memories surfaced unbidden, the day I had signed the closing papers on this house, so full of hope after years of struggle. The real estate market crash had taken my previous home and my marriage with it. The subsequent depression had nearly taken my life. Moving here was supposed to be a fresh start, a healing place. I remembered the day I brought Daisy and Blossom home, how their antics had made me laugh for the first time in months. How caring for them gave structure to days that had previously stretched empty before me. How their simple needs, food, water, shelter, affection, provided purpose when I had none of my own. The medicine cabinet in my bathroom still contained the orange prescription bottles, now dusty with disuse. Before the goats, those pills were the only thing keeping me tethered to life. Now they stood abandoned, replaced by morning rituals of feeding, afternoons spent in the pasture, evenings watching the goats settle into their shelter. The irony was bitter. The very animals that had saved me from darkness were now plunging me back toward it. What would happen when they were gone, when I woke to silence instead of their eager greetings, when the routine that anchored my days disappeared? I reached for my phone, scrolling through contacts, desperate for someone who might understand, who might help. Most friends had drifted away during my darkest period, uncomfortable with the depths of my depression. Family lived states away, offering sympathetic words but little practical assistance. My finger hovered over the name Dr. Melissa Chen, my former therapist who had helped me through the worst of my breakdown. We had not spoken in over a year, not since I had proudly told her I was tapering off my medication, feeling stable for the first time in years. Would she remember me? Would she have any advice to offer in this situation? "Sarah, is everything okay?" Her voice sounded concerned when she answered, doubtless surprised by my unexpected call. The story poured out of me, the house, the goats, the HOA, the looming deadline. "I know it sounds ridiculous to be this upset over farm animals," I finished, voice cracking. "But Daisy and Blossom are not just pets. They are the reason I get out of bed some mornings. I do not know what will happen to me if they are taken away." A long silence followed. Then Dr. Chen asked, "Have you ever heard of emotional support animals?" "Like service dogs for blind people?" I asked, confused. "Not exactly. Service animals are trained to perform specific tasks for people with disabilities. Emotional support animals provide therapeutic benefit through companionship. They do not require specific training, but they do require documentation from a mental health professional certifying that the animal alleviates symptoms of a psychological condition." My heartbeat quickened, and goats can qualify. Any domesticated animal can potentially qualify if a licensed mental health professional determines that their presence provides significant support for a diagnosed condition. ESAs are protected under the Fair Housing Act, which can supersede certain housing restrictions, including those imposed by HOAs. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope ignited within me. So, if I had documentation stating that Daisy and Blossom are emotional support animals for my anxiety and depression, then the HOA might be legally obligated to provide reasonable accommodation, Dr. Chen confirmed. But Sarah, this would only work if the animals genuinely do provide emotional support for a documented condition. This is not a loophole to be exploited. It is a legitimate protection for people whose mental health depends on animal companionship. "They saved my life, Melissa," I whispered, using her first name as I had during our most intense therapy sessions. "When nothing else could reach me, they did. I do not think I would survive losing them." "Then come see me tomorrow. We will evaluate your situation properly and determine if ESA designation is appropriate." That night I sat in the goat pen until stars appeared overhead. Daisy curled against my side while Blossom rested her head in my lap. My fingers gently stroked their soft fur as I whispered a promise. "They are not taking you anywhere. We are going to fight this." The morning after my conversation with Dr. Chen, I awoke with purpose replacing despair. The deadline was just 3 days away, but for the first time, I had a potential path forward. I immediately called my employer to request emergency personal days, knowing I would need every available hour to prepare my case. My first stop was Dr. Chen's office, where she conducted a thorough evaluation of my mental health. The familiar process of discussing my symptoms felt different this time, not a desperate plea for help, but a methodical documentation of my condition and the genuine support provided by my goats. "Your case is textbook, Sarah," Dr. Chen explained as she reviewed her notes. "Your major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder are well documented from your previous treatment. What we need to establish clearly is how Daisy and Blossom specifically alleviate these conditions." I described in detail how the goats had become integral to my recovery, how their need for care forced me to maintain a healthy schedule, how their playful antics lifted my mood during dark moments, how the physical contact with them helped ground me during anxiety attacks. Dr. Chen recorded everything, occasionally asking for specific examples or clarification. "Based on our session today and your treatment history, I believe Daisy and Blossom qualify as legitimate emotional support animals," she concluded. "I will prepare an ESA letter detailing your condition and the therapeutic benefits they provide." She cautioned me that the letter alone might not be sufficient. The Fair Housing Act provides protection, but enforcement can be complicated, especially with resistant HOAs. You should gather additional documentation and familiarize yourself with the specific legal protections. That afternoon became a crash course in fair housing law. My dining table disappeared beneath printouts of legal cases, HUD guidelines, and state regulations. My laptop glowed late into the night as I researched precedents involving ESAs and homeowners associations. Several key points emerged from my research. First, the Fair Housing Act required housing providers, including HOAs, to make reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities, including mental health conditions. Second, allowing an ESA constituted such a reasonable accommodation. Third, while the HOA could request documentation of the disability and need for the ESA, they could not demand specific medical details or impose burdensome requirements that did not apply to other residents. The next day, I consulted with a local attorney who specialized in housing law. The consultation fee strained my budget, but her expertise proved invaluable. "Your documentation appears solid," she confirmed after reviewing Dr. Chen's letter and my research. "The HOA may try to argue that goats are fundamentally different from traditional ESAs like dogs or cats, but courts have consistently ruled that the species is irrelevant if the animal genuinely provides emotional support." She helped me draft a formal reasonable accommodation request, citing specific provisions of the Fair Housing Act and relevant case law. "Send this by certified mail immediately," she advised. "It establishes a paper trail and puts them on notice that you are asserting federally protected rights, not simply challenging their covenant." The final piece of my preparation involved gathering evidence of the goat's minimal impact on the community. I took detailed photographs of their clean enclosure, recorded sound levels to demonstrate their quietness compared to neighborhood dogs, and collected statements from supportive neighbors attesting to the absence of any nuisance. I also created a comprehensive dossier on Nigerian dwarf goats specifically, documenting their small size, cleanliness, and suitability as companion animals rather than agricultural livestock. Several veterinary journals and small animal husbandry guides provided scientific support for my position. The night before the deadline, I assembled everything into a professional portfolio: Dr. Chen's ESA letter, the legal accommodation request, supporting documentation about the goats, statements from neighbors, and printouts of relevant Fair Housing Act provisions. The completed binder represented hours of research, hundreds of dollars in professional fees, and my last best hope for keeping Daisy and Blossom. Standing before my bathroom mirror, I practiced presenting my case, forcing confidence into my voice, rehearsing responses to potential objections, preparing for Karen's inevitable resistance. The woman who stared back at me looked different from the person who had received that first HOA notice. Fear remained, but it was now tempered with determination and knowledge. I visited the goats one last time before bed, bringing them apple slices as a special treat, as they nib. Led contentedly from my palm, I felt a profound sense of responsibility, not just to these animals who had helped heal me, but to everyone facing similar situations. "Tomorrow we make our stand," I told them as they pressed their warm bodies against my legs. "Not just for us, but for everyone who has ever felt powerless against people like Karen." That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, the portfolio resting on my nightstand, ready for the confrontation to come. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it knowing I had done everything possible to protect my little family. The morning of the deadline dawned clear and bright, a perfect spring day that belied the tension knotting my stomach. I dressed carefully in business casual attire, professional enough to be taken seriously, but not so formal as to appear intimidating. The portfolio sat on my passenger seat as I drove to the community center where Karen maintained an office for HOA business. The clock on the dashboard read 9:15 a.m. when I pulled into the parking lot. Through the large windows, I could see Karen seated at a desk, typing on a computer. She glanced up at the sound of my car, her expression souring when she recognized me. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my portfolio and walked inside. The small reception area smelled of artificial air freshener and new carpet. A plaque on the wall listed past HOA presidents, with Karen's name prominently displayed at the bottom, the only name rendered in gold rather than silver. "Good morning, Ms. Winters," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to discuss an important matter regarding the notice about my goats." Karen's smile was practiced and cold. "Unless you are here to confirm their removal by this evening, I am afraid there is nothing to discuss. The board's decision is final." I placed the portfolio on her desk, opening it to reveal the official letterhead from Dr. Chen's practice. "I am here to submit a formal request for reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act. Daisy and Blossom are my registered emotional support animals, prescribed by my licensed healthcare provider to assist with a diagnosed disability." The reaction was immediate. Karen's posture stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the document. "This is absurd. You cannot possibly expect us to believe that goats are service animals." "Emotional support animals, not service animals," I corrected calmly. "And yes, under federal law, they qualify regardless of species. My doctor has certified that they provide genuine therapeutic benefit for my condition." Karen pushed the portfolio away without reading further. "This is clearly a last-minute attempt to circumvent our covenants. The board will not be manipulated by dubious medical claims." I had anticipated this response. The Fair Housing Act supersedes HOA covenants when it comes to reasonable accommodations for disabilities. I have included relevant legal precedents in Section 3 of the portfolio. You will find that courts have consistently upheld ESA protections across various housing contexts. "We will need to consult our attorney," Karen said, reaching for her phone. "Of course," I replied. I welcome legal review of my request. I should mention that HUD guidelines indicate that housing providers should respond to accommodation requests within 10 business days. Until then, any enforcement action would be premature and potentially constitute discrimination under federal law. Karen's hand froze over the phone. For the first time since our interactions began, uncertainty flickered across her face. This requires full board consideration. I am calling an emergency meeting for this evening. I will be there, I said, leaving a business card with my contact information on top of the portfolio. Please ensure all board members review the documentation beforehand. Word of the emergency meeting spread quickly through the neighborhood. By 7:00 p.m., the community center was filled beyond capacity. Residents stood along the walls and crowded the doorway, curiosity drawing even those who typically avoided HOA affairs. Karen had arranged the room differently from regular meetings. The board table now formed a semicircle reminiscent of a judicial panel, with a single chair positioned before them like a defendant's stand. The message was clear. This was to be a tribunal, not a discussion. As I took my seat, facing the 7 board members, I noticed that my portfolio had been distributed to each of them. Some, like Robert and Michael, had clearly reviewed the materials, judging from their notations and flagged pages. Others, including Karen, kept the folders conspicuously closed. Karen called the meeting to order, her voice carrying artificial pleasantness. We are gathered to address a request for accommodation submitted by Sarah Jenkins regarding her unauthorized livestock. Before she presents her case, our attorney has some preliminary comments. A thin man in an expensive suit stood and introduced himself as the HOA's legal counsel. While the Fair Housing Act does provide certain protections for assistance animals, there are limitations to what constitutes a reasonable accommodation. The Act does not require accommodations that fundamentally alter the nature of the community or impose undue hardship on other residents. As the attorney continued outlining potential objections to my request, I glanced around the room, gauging reactions. Most residents listened with neutral expressions, but I noticed the Johnsons and several other neighbors nodding encouragingly in my direction. When invited to present my case, I approached the board table confidently, placing additional copies of my documentation before them. For 15 minutes, I outlined my position, explaining my medical condition without unnecessary detail, describing the genuine support Daisy and Blossom provided, and highlighting the legal protections applicable to my situation. Nigerian dwarf goats are smaller than many dog breeds permitted in Meadow Creek estates, I concluded. They are clean, quiet, and confined to my property. Allowing them to remain would not fundamentally alter the community character or burden other residents. It would, however, make an enormous difference to my health and well-being. Karen was the first to respond, her voice sharp with frustration. If we make this exception, what prevents every resident from claiming their prohibited animals are for emotional support? We could have chickens, pigs, even horses throughout the neighborhood. The law requires legitimate documentation from licensed healthcare providers, I replied. Random claims without proper medical basis would not qualify for protection. Karen turned to the attorney. Can we require additional verification, perhaps an independent evaluation? Before the lawyer could respond, Frank Wilson, the silver-haired board member who had seemed uncomfortable at the previous meeting, cleared his throat. If I may speak, I have reviewed Ms. Jenkins' documentation thoroughly, and it appears to meet all legal requirements under the Fair Housing Act. The room fell silent as Frank continued. Before joining this board, I practiced real estate law for 30 years. In my professional opinion, denying this accommodation request would expose our HOA to significant legal liability. Federal courts have consistently ruled in favor of ESA owners in similar cases, often awarding substantial damages against housing providers who failed to make reasonable accommodations. Karen's face flushed with anger. Are you suggesting we simply abandon our covenants because of some legal technicality? I am suggesting we comply with federal law, Frank replied evenly. The Fair Housing Act is not a technicality. It is civil rights legislation designed to prevent discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Robert, typically Karen's staunch ally, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What would be the potential cost if we fought this in court and lost? The attorney's answer was reluctantly forthright. Legal fees alone could exceed $50,000. Damages in similar cases have ranged from $10,000 to $30,000, plus plaintiff's attorney fees. A murmur rippled through the assembled residents. Karen attempted to regain control of the meeting, but the momentum had clearly shifted. When Frank formally moved to grant my accommodation request, Michael Patel seconded the motion almost immediately. The vote proceeded around the table. Frank, yes. Michael, yes. Robert, hesitantly yes. Two other members following suit. By the time it reached Karen, the accommodation had already been approved 5-1, rendering her opposing vote largely symbolic. As the meeting adjourned, residents approached me with congratulations and questions about the goats. Through the crowd, I caught sight of Karen gathering her papers, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Our eyes met briefly across the room, her gaze promising this was not truly over, mine steady with the quiet confidence of knowing I had prevailed not through belligerence, but through knowledge and determination. The official letter arrived 1 week after the emergency meeting. Printed on HOA letterhead but conspicuously missing Karen's signature, it acknowledged my request for reasonable accommodation and confirmed that Daisy and Blossom could remain on my property as emotional support animals. A set of reasonable care guidelines was attached, standards I already exceeded in my daily maintenance of the goats and their enclosure. Frank Wilson had personally delivered the letter, waiting on my porch while I read it. "Congratulations," he said when I looked up with tears of relief in my eyes. "Your case has already sparked some important conversations about how our HOA operates." He explained that several board members had begun questioning her enforcement actions after learning about Karen's pattern of selective application of the covenants. "There is talk of forming a committee to review and possibly revise some of the more restrictive bylaws," he added. "I would be grateful for your input when the time comes." The neighborhood dynamics shifted subtly in the weeks that followed. Residents who had previously kept their distance now stopped to chat when passing my property, often asking to meet the famous goats who had challenged the HOA regime. Children who had always admired Daisy and Blossom from afar now visited regularly with their parents' permission, delighting in feeding apple slices to the gentle animals. Karen remained conspicuously absent from these community interactions. Neighbors reported that she had resigned as HOA president, citing personal reasons in a terse email to board members. She was rarely seen outside her home now, and when our paths occasionally crossed at the local grocery store, she pretended not to see.